coming up on The Cost of Living.
So I've been lowered 3 times in 3 months. And now I'm at $2,600. So I've been dropped 70% in 3 months.
Stacy is talking about her credit card limit. It used to be $8,000. Then, out of the blue, her bank said, nope. So, what's it worried about? Hi, I'm Paul Havershrud. Welcome to The Cost of Living. The big banks cutting credit card limits is like a canary in the coal mine. And the coal mine? Is the economy. Also today, countries around the world are in a race to be more productive, which means everyone living there just has more. When Jim Balsley, the former head of Research in Motion, sizes up the competition, he says Canada is losing. Up first, when you're grinding at work, it can feel like you're giving the job your blood, sweat, and tears. But what if they literally want that stuff, too? So, Ellis Cho, you met up with someone recently. She was on her way to work.
Yeah, I met Ellie Thompson. She's in her early 20s, a psychology major at the University of Calgary, and she's got bills to pay. So,
currently, I'm working as a server and events bartender at Char Bar.
Char Bar, it's a nice spot. It's in an old brick building downtown.
Yeah, some people might know it because the owners were on Top Chef Canada. So Ellie was pretty happy to get a job there. But before she started, she had to go through orientation, learn all the rules, and also hand over her fingerprints.
I thought, that's a little intense. Like, it seemed a little intense for me to be like, a fingerprint, like, why?
And they wanted her prints because
she has to clock in every day using a fingerprint scanner.
So I'll put my finger on the scanner, it'll scan it, and then either a green or a red light will pop up saying whether or not it's accepted that it's me or not.
This is very like Ethan Hunt in Mission Impossible.
Right? It kind of seems like high security stuff, but the use of biometrics is growing in regular workplaces. Your face, your eyes, your fingers, your personal and biological data is being used to do things like track your productivity, your movements, and whether you show up to work on time.
Hard not to think Big Brother is watching, no?
Some people definitely feel that way. The trend really got going during the pandemic when people started working remotely. Companies wanted to keep an eye on them.
Yeah, you did hear a lot about monitoring of keyboard clicks, cameras being installed to track eye movements. What companies wanted was to make sure people were at their desks.
And this stuff just took off. According to the consulting group iMark, within a decade, the global biometrics market is expected to hit more than $140 billion. That's more than triple where it is now.
So more places are interested in doing this, but who are they? Like, who is doing this?
Biometric monitoring covers a lot of different things, but if we're just talking about fingerprint scans, you'll find it in places where hourly workers have to punch the clock. So we're talking the hospitality sector, restaurants, hotels, or the labor sector, like construction.
And why is this better than just the old-fashioned punch clock?
Companies say it's a better way to keep track of employees' time. You can lose or forget your key card, but you can't lose your finger, right? It also keeps people from what they call buddy punching.
And this would be like your friend's late, so you punch their time card?
Yeah, it happens.
You know, Alice, if you were late, I would punch your time card.
That's very sweet. But time is money. 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there, it adds up. And it can cost a company a lot of money. Hannah Johnston is an assistant professor at York University's School of HR Management. She specializes in the digitalization of work.
The justification that many employers will use for the introduction of that type of system is that it's highly reliable, right? That you can't really forge someone else's fingerprint, that it's very efficient, right? We used to have sort of lines of people that would queue up to, do their punch card.
So bottom line, companies say it's easier to use a fingerprint scan.
Yeah, that's the company's side, but what about employees? I can't see every employee being cool with this.
They're not. A few years ago, Canfor, a lumber mill in BC, introduced a fingerprint time clock. The union filed a grievance saying it was an unreasonable invasion of privacy, but it lost in arbitration. And after that, some workers refused to give their fingerprints and ended up losing their jobs.
Is that legal? You can be terminated because you refuse to do something like this?
The arbitrator ruled that the company had a right to bring the system in. Canfor argued that its system was safe, that it only records parts of the fingerprint. The company said it would be practically impossible to reconstruct an original fingerprint from the digital template. But Urs Hent-Gardner disagrees. He teaches computer science at the University of Waterloo.
Lots of research has shown that using this template, it is possible to reconstruct a fingerprint, but maybe not precisely your fingerprint, but a fingerprint that will allow the attacker to log in as you. And so this is from a privacy point of view a problem, but also from a security point of view.
There's some big issues at play here, Ellis. I mean, he mentions privacy. There's also surveillance. There's the idea of trust between employers and workers.
Yeah, Urs says there are less invasive ways to clock people in and out, right? Especially if you're talking about jobs in hotels and restaurants. Biological data is highly sensitive information. It could be used to access a building, your bank account, any personal information that's attached to your fingerprint.
What happens if this information leaks, right? Somebody steals it, the company screws up, misconfigures the database, or the company turns malicious, sells the information, right? These are all things that have happened, and then your personal information is gone.
Yeah, once your biometrics are out there in the world, they're out there, and if that goes bad, well then, all right.
I know, yeah. Hannah Johnston, the HR expert, feels the same way. She says, we just don't know enough about the risks.
One of the reasons that we need to be very cautious about the introduction of these systems is that we have not yet even begun to imagine the potential uses for these types of data.
Hannah says we don't have enough guardrails around the use of biometrics in the workplace. The laws are behind on this. Technology changes so fast that we're having trouble keeping up.
And so until we have, again, limits around how data can be collected, how it can be used, rights around disposal, rights around storage, that this is information that we should be very reluctant to hand over to anyone else.
Yeah, once the information is out there, where is it being stored?
That's not something we always know. Employees don't always know. Is it with the restaurant owners? Is it on some server in Tennessee?
And right now we don't have anything that says, you need to comply with storing things here in this country, right? What if it's stored on servers in some other country where you have even fewer protections?
But we do have existing privacy rights, correct?
Yeah, we do. But it's a concern for privacy experts. Privacy commissioners across the country have been calling on governments to strengthen protections for employees. Because right now, there's a patchwork of privacy laws in Canada. Quebec has the most stringent laws. Employers there have to justify why they're using a biometric system, and employees have the right to refuse to give their fingerprint.
Okay, so that's Quebec, but what if you're in a different province? Are you really going to turn down a job because of a fingerprint? What if you don't have much job security or you're young, just starting out? Are you really going to speak up about any of this?
Well, that's the situation Ellie was in, Ellie Thompson. But you know what? She was cool with it.
She was. All the stuff we're talking about, identity theft, privacy, surveillance, Ellie was like, eh.
Exactly. Because she's used to biometric tracking in the workplace. The majority of the places she's worked in used biometrics. And she actually sees an upside to it.
It's protecting me by saying, I am here, I'm clocking myself in and I'm clocking myself out. No one else can clock me in or out. So in a sense, it helps me track my hours and making sure that I'm being paid for the hours I'm working and help me track my wages.
She says our phones already have our faces and fingerprints, and big tech already tracks a lot of our data.
It is just becoming more normalized to be more digital in every aspect of our lives, from like schooling to working. There's always new technology being implemented that people are just having to get used to. So until they start asking for blood samples, I think it'll be okay.
Okay, so that's a no on the big needle.
That's what it sounds like.
All right, thanks, Alice.
You're welcome.
How do you know the big banks are getting worried about the economy? Is Scotia suddenly running ads saying, "You're poorer than you think"? Well, no, not quite. But our producer Danielle Nerman finds the banks are sending a message, at least to some customers, that tougher days could be coming.
These days, you need a credit card to shop online, rent a car, or pay your kids' school fees. So imagine having your credit limit squeezed again and again.
So I've been lowered 3 times in 3 months.
At the start of the summer, Stacy had an $8,000 credit limit.
And now I'm at 2,600. So I've been dropped 70% in 3 months.
And she's not alone. There's plenty of chatter about this on Reddit and Facebook. Canadians complaining that their credit card limit was reduced out of the blue. Stacy says her credit score is good. She's never missed a payment. But
I carry a small balance. Like, it's not large. Maybe, it's less than $2,500. So to me, that's not a large amount.
But a bank may not see it that way. At least not right now. The Bank of Canada says more Canadians are carrying balances on their credit cards than they were a couple years ago. With the rising cost of food and housing, Brian Doyle says more people are living off credit. And that's making the banks nervous.
They see the train coming down the track. Yeah, they're going to pull the rug out from under you. They've got to maintain their bottom line and do what's right for their shareholders.
Brian runs the insolvency trustee firm Doyle Saluski. He says this is just what banks do when the economy slows down. They batten down the hatches. And right now, more people are defaulting on their credit cards. In the first half of this year, the write-off rate for Canadian Tire credit cards almost reached 8%, double what it was in 2021. Brent Reynolds says Canada's 5 big banks are also seeing a rise in credit risk. He's the former chief credit officer with Capital One.
The banks are definitely preparing for a recession. They've all dramatically increased their credit reserves, so the money they set aside for future losses. And with inflation, I think they're all expecting that risk is going to continue to worsen.
Brent says the banks are clawing back on credit limits as a way to protect themselves from customers who may default in the future.
A lot of the banks have kind of an always-on program to be reviewing credit lines and increasing and decreasing them. You just see it that tool used a lot more when they're pulling out their recession playbooks, so to speak.
Even if your credit score looks good on Equifax or TransUnion, you could still be flagged. Brent says banks have a lot of data on you, and they're using AI to sniff out any risk.
Yeah, I mean, AI is a bit of a buzzword, but think of it as your credit score and your past credit behavior and income and other factors go into an algorithm that determines what they predict your likelihood is of defaulting or going into default.
A credit card issuer can drop your limit at any time without warning. It's all in the fine print of that agreement none of us ever read. Stacy gets that rules are rules, but thinks banks could at least give customers like her a heads up.
Giving me a call or, giving me like a 30-day get in touch with us to talk this over. Don't just treat me like someone who's going to default because you think I'm going to.
For The Cost of Living, I'm Danielle Nerman.
On your radio and by podcast, this is The Cost of Living. I'm Paul Haberstrood. In Canada, we're hewers of wood and drawers of water, right? For a long time, that was the idea. Forestry, oil and gas, mining, these are the things that drove the economy. But the big money now isn't so much in brawn as it is brains. To win in the knowledge economy, we need to be hewers of ideas. And right now, we're not winning. Just look at Canada's economic productivity. You can draw a straight line between productivity and how much money we make. We'll soon rank last among the OECD's 38 countries. So what do we do about that? I spoke to the former head of Research in Motion, Jim Balsley, about it earlier this year. He says winning in the knowledge economy comes back to ideas. Not just who has them, but who owns them.
Pleasure to be with you, Paul.
Jim, this isn't the first interview you've given about Canada's lack of productivity. Why do you think productivity is so important?
Well, very simply, you hit the nail on the head. If, as Paul Krugman famously said, productivity isn't everything, but over a long period of time, it is everything. And for 20 years, I've been cautioning if we don't update our approaches, it's going to come crashing on our ability to pay for our country and make ends meet at the family and household.
Well, there are a lot of explanations for Canada's lagging productivity. You've called some of these ideas outdated. If you were to sum up the conventional thinking around this in Canada, what is it?
Well, it's very simple. Fundamentally, in the tangible production economy, the traditional making of things, it works by a set of rules and policies, and Canada did those. We liberalized markets, labor, and products with free trade and efficiency structures for the tangible production economy. But the ideas economy, which it used to be 17% of the Standard & Poor's 500 and is now 92% and climbing, works in the exact opposite way. It works by restriction and forcing people to pay you a rent. And we have no policies to properly participate in that. Our playbook was only for the traditional economy, which was good for that. But as the world moved to an ideas economy over the last 35 years, we didn't update our playbook. And that lack of updating perfectly links to the time our productivity started and prosperity started eroding.
Okay, when you talk about the ideas economy, when you talk about companies and Canadian companies benefiting from that, you're talking about intellectual property, yeah?
Well, I talked about companies, but also citizens benefiting from it. Yes, I'm talking about intellectual property and data, yes.
And so what are we not doing then with intellectual property that you think we should be doing?
We don't teach how to manage intellectual property in the corporate environment. We don't put conditions on our research like other countries do to benefit. We have no research. When we do our research funding, we don't link it to economic benefits for Canada, unlike the rest of the world. So we had fundamental battery IP, Dalhousie did, that they gave to Tesla. We have fundamental AI IP from U of T given to Google. All kinds of universities across Canada were transferring the intellectual property of joint research to Huawei. All kinds of university research transferred to Uber, and then they shut down their R&D in Canada. It's the norm. I think it's something like 75% of the IP filed in these realms go to foreign parties. So no other country does that. When they come up with an idea that they taxpayer fund, they have strategies to keep it in to the economic benefit of the country, whereas Canada took a hands-off approach, and ideas works on smart hands-on. So the tangible production economy is smart hands off. The ideas economy is smart hands on. We ran a two-legged race with one leg. And so we were hopping instead of running, and we're very good hoppers, but you can't beat a runner.
So what you're saying here is part of Canada's productivity, a big part of Canada's productivity issue comes back to this not locking up IP. When we talk about productivity, and it's been a big conversation for a long, long time, as you know, there's any number of reasons that get given for why Canada is not productive. We don't have an innovative culture. Our companies don't invest in technology. Maybe it's taxes. Maybe it's we don't allow foreign ownership. There's this idea that it's cultural. You know, we're not the risk-taking, raw meat-eating, entrepreneurial Americans. You've heard all of these. If you think about that cultural one, does that hold any water for you?
It's unsubstantiated garbage, and it's an excuse made by those that have no other understanding for how it works. Canadians start businesses at the second highest rate in the world next to Americans. We are risk takers. The issue is our policy puts wind in their face, not at their back. And so you have to understand how the economy works. You have to understand how other countries create sophisticated public-private relationships to come forward and thrive in this. And those are fundamentally absent in Canada. And so making up all these false myths of complacency, failure to invest, and all that, I've yet to meet in my career somebody that says, oh, I don't want to grow my profits this year, or a sales rep that says, oh, I don't want to make more sales, or a fund manager that says, oh, I don't want higher returns from my fund. Everybody goes to bed every night sweating how do they perform better no matter what the business. So this myth of complacency is flawed. Our policy apparatus has made it so that it's not smart to invest in ideas much of the time in Canada to the degree other nations do because of the policy framework. And that's why you see our pension funds investing much more in tech outside of Canada than in Canada, because it's not the investment opportunity because of the policy preconditions.
So what do you think when you see the Canadian government giving billions to Stellantis and Volkswagen for EV plants?
Well, I think you need to do them with the proper economic analysis. So we have trouble seeing that, but we're seeing there's not as many jobs as we thought there were. They're not as high paying what we thought they were. And most importantly, there is no strategy for the insertion of Canadian IP into it so that we get the wealth effects. So all these other countries are going, oh boy, we bring our own machine companies and all our own IP, and we get to entrench it in Canada. We get to move it offshore for cheaper taxation. And then Canada subsidizes them for relatively low-wage jobs and creating a low tax base. So I think if we're going to spend those dollars, I think we could do them in ways where we could capture much more economic benefit when we're at it to drive up our GDP per capita. But I think this approach is institutionalizing a low productivity.
Well, what about Canadian companies that are successful? Like, you think about Canadian mining, you think tech. But I saw you mention recently that tech has only filed something like 7 patents in the last 8 years. You look at the global mining industry in that time, it's like 90,000. Why is a tech not filing for more patents?
I think that's because our traditional business community missed the shift because it wasn't in our education system, it wasn't in our board of directors training, it wasn't in our policy apparatus. So we just carried on the playbook for traditional production economy. If tech's filed 7 patents and 90,000 have been filed in their sector in the last 10 years, they're not in a position to do value-added products and processes unless they paid most of the profits to the keeper of that. Some large group of big companies in mining decided they were going to spend vast sums of time and money to generate 90,000 patents. China's filed almost 400,000 patents in AI over the last few years. The world is playing a claiming, owning, predatory ideas rent game here. And it's not a collegial game. It's a winner take all. It's win-loss. It's predatory. And if you read what I read, I'm simply saying the structure for success in the economy of the last 30 years has changed, and we have to update our understanding and toolkit. And that's what I'm trying to address in what I'm advocating for here.
Well, how dire is this for Canada right now then, Jim? Because you're talking about China filing 40,000 patents for AI. Well, that is done. Like, has this ship sailed? Is it locked in for us?
I said 400,000 patents for...
Excuse me, 400,000 patents for AI.
No, we need to smarten up. Like, we have to stop repeating old tropes. We need to update our approaches. So can we fix it? Absolutely. Can we turn this ship around? I think we can turn it around pretty quickly. We have the talent, we have the people, we have the opportunity. So I think we have to do it as the most urgent public policy priority when it comes to the economy. But we have to start doing it now. It would have been, the old expression, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Canada would be $100 billion more prosperous per year had we done these things on a timely basis. Because that's our erosion in productivity during the shift era if you factored into our economy to date. So it's time to catch up.
Why are you fighting this fight? You could, sail off into the sunset.
Well, on a bad day, don't ask me that question. Look, I mean, like all of us, we love our country, and there's a lot of great people that do great things, volunteering at food banks and helping different people in different ways. And the moral code is you carry the load you think you can handle. This is something I think I can handle. I know what I'm talking about. I know it's consequential, and it's, the moral code is leave a campsite better than you found it. So lots of people do this. We all care about our country. Lots of people do good things. This is something I can do.
Well, Jim Balzilli, thanks for all that.
Pleasure's mine. Great to talk to you, Paul.
Jim Balzilli is the founder of the Center for International Governance Innovation and the former co-CEO of Research in Motion. That's all for this week. The Cost of Living is based in Calgary. And if you just can't wait to listen to the show on the radio, feel free to listen to the podcast. It drops on Friday nights. You can find it anywhere you get podcasts. The show is produced by Daniel Nerman, Ellis Cho, and Jennifer Keene, with help from Caroline Ferris. I'm Paul Habersrud. Thanks for listening.